Hello, everyone. Welcome to Adventures in Dolls, the United Federation of Doll Clubs YouTube channel. Today, our program is on Jumeau, presented by Lisa Nemi. But before we get to that, if you've been enjoying our programs, please give us a like and subscribe, and be sure to do it so that you don't miss your next adventure in dolls. If you have any comments, leave it in the comments section. And now let's get to the video.
My name is Lisa Nemi, and I am a member of two clubs in Region 15. I am a member of the Doll Study Club of Boston, and I'm a member of the Granite State Doll Club. So I'm delighted to be able to give this presentation for UFDC. Right on the cover here, you can see, of course, the beautiful Eiffel Tower of Paris, and you can see one of my Jumeaus that I've had over the years. This is a very pretty one, so I figured she would grace the cover page of our presentation. So I'm going to go through a presentation, and it'll give you a little bit of history of the dolls, of the maker, and some ways to identify what model you might have, and then some ways to identify condition, and then I'll give the credits at the end. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Jumeau firm, and they were in business for a long time. They were in business for over 100 years. It was started in the 1840s. So that's way before people thought of collecting dolls, by Pierre-Francois Jumeau, not Emile Jumeau, his father, Pierre-Francois, and his partner started to make miniature ladies to demonstrate and model some of the current fashions, kind of like we'd see Barbie today. And these dolls were lady dolls, and they had paper mache heads. They weren't marked. Very few of them still remain, but occasionally you will see them, and you really wouldn't even know that they were a Jumeau, because they don't really look anything like the dolls we all know and love as Jumeau dolls. So after doing the ladies for a little while, they started to create the bisque heads, probably more of what we know today as being a Jumeau Poupee doll. And they had kid bodies stuffed with sawdust, and they had very fancy costumes. And some of the costumes were costing more than the dolls themselves. So the lady dolls went into the 1860s and 70s, at which time Jumeau started making the bébés and entered some dolls into it's an international toy competition. And then many different countries participated in it, and Jumeau won the gold medal for his toys at that competition. From then on, this médaille d'or, which is French for gold medal, a blue stamp depicting that went on the backs of all the dolls after, and I will show you what that stamp looks like. So if you have a doll with the stamp on it, you know that the doll had to have been made after 1878. So it is one way to help date the dolls. So Jumeau started making bébés and really stopped making the lady dolls, because that seemed to be what everybody wanted. And because the dolls were all made by hand, and when they were made by hand, Jumeau was trying to figure out, well, what's going to sell with these little dolls that look like children. So we experimented with different looks. And when I show you some of the pictures, you'll see that there's no standardization on the models. They especially the early ones, they had all different kinds of look, because they were experimenting on what was actually going to sell. Then when they came up with a few models that did sell, they really capitalized on it and made a lot of them. Then to market for something different, the Jumeau firm started to make open mouth dolls with teeth, dolls with eyes that opened and closed, a few more things like jointed wrists and different kinds of outfits, and then some characters and some other types of some novelties to try to get more people to buy. They might already had a Jumeau bébé. I'm going to get a different one. I want to have the one with the character face, or this new and improved. Like you'd have Barbie, and then Barbie would have Midge, and they'd have Ken, and they have different models by the same firm. So they started doing that in the 1880s, late 1880s into the 1890s. And then, of course, the Germans started in on all this, and they began mass producing dolls like crazy. And in order to compete, and I mentioned before that the French doll makers were making their dolls by hand. Well, how can you compete with somebody who's mass producing them in a factory? So the French firms got together and they formed SFBJ, which is the Société Française de Fabrication of Bébés and Jouets, meaning dolls and toys, in order to try to compete with the Germans. In other words, they all banded together. All the small French firms banded together and they formed SFBJ. So of course they cheapened the quality of the dolls so that they could compete at the price point that the Germans were. And then Jumeau made dolls probably into the 1940s when Bluette got really popular. There were a few later like country dolls and regional dolls that they made, but they were nowhere near as nice as the ones that were the earliest ones. I would say between the 1870s up through the 1890s was the heyday golden era of the Jumeau firm. Over here on the right, we have a picture of Pierre Francois, the old man, and we have a picture of one of the advertisements for some of the dolls that were shown. And this is a Bébé Jumeau shown with a classic early costume that they would have had. And these are prices that they would have had for different sizes. As you can see, the same doll came in multiple sizes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through to 12. And they had different prices, and the prices are listed here in francs. Now, they would have even been expensive by today's calculation. If you do the conversion from 1880s to now, those dolls would have been very expensive. This is a quick lithograph or our art drawing that shows what the factory would have looked like in Montreuil, which is a town outside of Paris where the main factory was located. And one thing about Jumeau is that they had everything under one roof. They made just about everything but the eyes. The glass eyes that were put in the Jumeau dolls came from a specialty glass blowing factory in England. But most everything else was made right in that factory. So they did the heads, they did the bodies, they did the clothes, they did the wigs, they did the shoes, they did the hats, the whole works, which was kind of unusual. They were a self-sufficient firm. They had a giant kiln. They had body presses for doing the composition. They had painting stations. You can see a lady here. She's probably doing quality control and assembling bodies. Wouldn't you love to have a couple of these? I see some very pretty heads in the baskets. The artists that worked at the stations that took the greenware and made it into the faces, they had to cut the eyes. And so you'll see, until the making of the dolls got standardized, the people would have different eye shapes depending on what artist was working on them. And we'll see in a few slides, we'll see that the artist that painted the dolls actually also signed them in a way with little check marks on the back. So you can see that because these were done by hand and they weren't done with stencils and templates, the eye cuts can be a little bit odd. This is another photo of the Jumeau factory. And this is the shipping department where they had the boxes and the wrapping over here, and the little dolls were clothed. And you can see that they're wearing the early chemises. And they most of the dolls were shipped with chemises. They either had a little slip for the little girl recipient to make their clothes, or some of them that were going to the stores, the big department stores, would often be dressed in really pretty fancy outfits to get people to buy them, because of course, as I said before, the outfits were very, very expensive. So they sold them both in Paris and other areas of France. They sold them over in the UK and other parts of Europe, and they shipped them to North America. So there are dolls that were made in France, shipped over here, and sold in the US in some of the fancy stores. The boxes were wood boxes at first, but those were probably heavy and expensive to make. So then they graduated to cardboard boxes, and I've got some pictures of those later on in the presentation. Again, wouldn't you love to have one of these? So the first dolls, as I said, were made with these ladies. And the first ladies were the paper mache ones. And there's so few of those, and there wasn't a good sample size, so I didn't really show them. Most collectors would love to have a Jumeau Poupee. And they started to be made, as I said, in the 1860s. And they were pressed bisque. And pressed bisque means that the china was made into like pie crust. And then by hand, the people in the manufacturing would press the pie crust into the head molds. So you can even see they made it very thin, and also there is no ridge on the outside of the head. The early mechanism for doing the heads was this pressing mechanism. And you can even see in some early dolls' heads, you can see fingerprints on the inside of the heads where the person making them pressed the bisque into the head. For the earliest dolls, and I go through a slide a little later on that talks about how you can tell an early doll from a later doll. This is a classic one that shows the uneven eye cuts I was talking about. These aren't even, but there's a certain charm about her. This one's also got what they call wraparound eyes. The eyes are almost too big for the face, and they kind of wrap around the side of the head. There were I'll call them three main Poupee heads, and others who are experts on Jumeaus might argue with me, but I kind of classify them into three heads. This is like the earliest head with the big gigantic eyes that are wrap around. And there's also this pretty face. This is a little bit smaller, more proportional eye cuts, lovely face. And this is kind of a version of that same face. This is the classic portrait Jumeau face. And then there's this other one, which you see a lot of these in very large sizes. They come in all different sizes. And some people are even reproducing these now as repros. And you can buy the clothing patterns and the bodies to put them on, and so artists are making reproductions of this particular one. This is also called a classic portrait Jumeau face. So these are the kind of three different faces. They usually they come from a small size, about size 10 inches, to as big exhibition size of 26. And what that means is, if Jumeau was going to a big toy exposition, trying to advertise, like Steiff has done with their big gigantic animals in the FAO Schwartz store, they would bring a gigantic model of one of the dolls. And the ones that they usually did was this portrait face. And you'll see her often in a very large size, over 20 inches. And they had very, very elaborate costumes. These dolls are fun because they're fun to accessorize. Fashions in general are fun to accessorize. And through a lot of these slides, with rare exception, most of the dolls are mine. Either I own them or I have had them. And this is the first French fashion I ever bought. I bought her in the early 1980s from the famous costumer and costume designer Sylvia MacNeil. So I bought this doll from Sylvia. It was the first French fashion I ever had. So once the craze for the lady dolls was pretty much over, Jumeau took that face, and I'll go back up to show you again, pretty much this face, and made it into a child's face. You can see how this one here is very similar to that lady face, as is this one with the wraparound eyes. This is called the Portrait Bébé premiere. So they had the portrait ladies, and now they had the Portrait Bébé, which means little girl. And this is the first issue of it. And you can see there's multiple faces of what this premiere Bébé looked like. Because again, as Jumeau was trying to figure out what face is going to sell, which faces do people like. So there's a lot of experimentation with the different models of the faces and different molds. These are all also, they are pressed bisque. Bisque is pressed into the mold by hand. The things you can see on some of these early dolls, the painting, the painting is very fine. The eyebrows are very light color, very subtle painting, two-tone lips, a lot of time spent making these just perfect. Very fair, very delicate looking. A lot of them had this mauve eyeliner. You can probably see it more on this doll. They had kind of like a pinkish shadowing over their eyes. This little gal here, which is called I think the pigeon face or the bird face doll, because it looks a little bit like a bird. She's got what they call spiral eyes, these spiral glass eyes, which are have great depth and are beautiful in person. These are mostly smaller. These dolls would be about 8 to 10 inches tall. This one might be about 12 inches. And this one's probably a little bit bigger, but they really weren't big in the early days because they were using the heads from the fashion dolls, or the heads are based on the heads of the fashion dolls. They also had wood bodies, and wood's expensive to carve. They had wood bodies with 8 ball joints, and we'll show you some of the bodies with the 8 ball joints. So with all that jointing and all that carving, and all that hand making. You can see how these dolls were expensive to make, and you can see they're absolutely beautiful. Some of them had, you can see this one has a skin wig. It's like a sheepskin wig. This one looks like she's got the remnants of one, and these two look like mohair wigs. The last thing I'll show you on this page is, this is called a Jumeau and cartouche. A cartouche is like a little seal or a little cartridge. That's really what the translation is. But the word Jumeau on the back of the head is inside this little shape. And it might be this doll that has it, or this one. It's got, that is a very rare marking, an early marking for the bébés. If you could get a doll with a Jumeau in cartouche, that's quite a find. So after those first ones, then there's the Jumeau kept making portraits, different shape. This is the second series portrait, as it's called. This little doll here is mine. She's very pale, but she's got these dark brown eyes, lovely little young child face. You can see this one here looks a lot like the Portrait Jumeau lady that I was telling you people make repros of. And this little one looks a lot like an EJ Jumeau, which we'll show you. But this is another almost square-jawed little gal with the spiral eyes and very, very delicate painting, the real fair eyebrows and just a real sweet look. So these are also called portraits, portrait bébés. So Jumeau started playing around with different faces, and he hired a famous sculptor. He was a sculptor who did more marble statues and bronze statues in France, and his name was Albert Carrier-Bayeux. And he had done some beautiful sculptures in museums in France. And so Jumeau hired him to do a certain sculpt for his bébé line. So they came up with this bébé triste. And the bébé triste was carved and sculpted by Carrier-Bayeux. And the face was meant to resemble a child version of King Henry II of Navarre. And Navarre is really in the Pyrenees between France and Germany. I'm just going France and Spain. So this is what he looked like as a little boy. So the doll was kind of molded to look like him. So this is called the long face Jumeau. It's called the Triste Jumeau. It's called the Cody Jumeau because allegedly Buffalo Bill Cody got one of these dolls and gave it to his niece. That's legend. They were made for about 6-8 years. They were only made in a few sizes. They were made in size 9, which is about a 20-inch doll, to size 14, which is like a 28-inch doll. So they're a little bit bigger than those little ones I was showing you earlier. They also had pressed bisque. They don't really have any markings except the size, so don't go looking for that. But since they're made after 1878, the body should have the stamp of the gold medal on the back of it's the lower back. They had beautiful wigs and beautiful costumes. These two dolls here are mine. I've got the same doll in 2 different eye colors. They were made for a short amount of time, and when you find them, they're beautiful in person. Here's another few of them. Again, this is one of the Carrier-Bayeux sculpts, and you can see how much these dolls look like that sculpture. This is one of my dolls here. And she's got a slightly different face from this one. They have either a sad face or more of a wistful face. But you can see the beautiful, even though this is a brunette, lovely, delicate painting, pale color bisque, and it's just perfect bisque. There's no flecks, no black dots, nothing. And beautiful, beautiful work. And the pale lips on this one, the pale eyebrows, just go great with her original wig. Another model. It's also Jumeau, but it's also rare. It looks a little bit like the other one, but not quite. And people either love this face or they hate this face. I particularly love it. And this doll here is mine, and this one here is mine. They are the EJA model. So it looks like we're starting to get into the EJs. It's standing for EJ, stands for Emile Jumeau, the son who took over the business. Now, these dolls were only made for 2 years. Maybe they weren't a success. Maybe they were too big. Maybe they were too expensive. I don't know. But they only made them for a couple of years. They either have this EJA marking on the back of the head, or it could be just the size. This doll here of mine, she just has size 12. This one has EJA 12. So they did make them. Maybe this was an earlier one before the mold had the EJA in it. They have applied ears because they're big dolls. These are 24 to 26 inches only. That's a good size baby. The applied ears means the ears were sculpted separately and added on. So a lot of big dolls have the ears added on. So getting a doll with applied ears is usually it was a more expensive process. So they're usually a little bit nicer model. They also had this early fixed wrist ball jointed body, and I think they have beautiful faces. Which leads into the famous and probably the most popular and favorite of the Jumeau dolls, which is this EJ model. And they were issued in 3 different times. They were made for 6 years. These 3 little dolls are mine. They are size 3. And you can see, even though they're E3Js, they look a little bit different depending on who painted them. The faces are slightly different, but they're very consistent. They have slightly parted lips, very sweet expression on the face. Usually eyebrows almost look a little bit surprised. They had 3 different markings. The first marking is the EJ, and then underneath it was the size number. So it's like EJ8, EJ, and then the 8 is underneath. And then, or 8 over EJ. And then there's some that would have, the next model had the number in the middle. So it would say E8J. And then the last one, the latest ones, would have the word déposé, which means copyright or patented, over the top. So it would say déposé E8J. These ones all say déposé E3J. So you know that was the latest of the 3 models. This one here is a size 6. She is 6 over EJ, slightly different face, not quite as dark as this one, a little bit paler. So she's a little bit more like the portrait Jumeaus that I was showing you among the first bébés that were made. They had number of sizes. They went from size 0, which is a teeny weeny one, about 8 inches tall, all the way through size 16, which I believe is like 32 inches tall. So they were all over the place in size, and probably the most popular sizes would be like a 5, an 8, and a 12. Those are the ones that in my collecting and selling career I've seen the most of, 5, 8, and 12. They had either mohair wigs like these little gals, or they had skin wigs like this one here. They either came in a chemise or they came in fancy clothing. All these gals here are wearing clothing that I made them, and this one's wearing the wig that I made her. So you can make your own clothes. And this, just note here that dolls with a fancy dress cost 3 times as much as the dolls with the chemise only. So if you have a designer Dior or one of them making the clothes for the dolls, which they did, you can see that the price of the doll just went exponentially up. So those are EJs. And here's a few more EJs that I either have in my collection or have had in my collection. So you can see, even though it's the same doll, slightly different face. This is a size 14, so this is a great big one. And this is a size 1. And you can see the face is pretty much the same. The eyes are a little bit bigger proportionally than this one, but it's pretty much the same face. There's a lot of consistency. They started to make templates to cut the eyes and to cite where the eyebrows are. Okay. Then we move to this odd model, which is called the Incised model. And if you can see down here on the right, you can see it says Déposé Jumeau. The whole word Jumeau is written out. And that's what they call an Incised Jumeau. And it's incised because the whole name is written into the disc. And the size number is underneath. And then these little red marks means that's the artist who painted the face. And you can see that they have slightly different face than the ones I just showed you. This is a real typical one in that they had a little bit smaller eye cuts. The eyes are not as big and bulgy as the ones from the EJs. They, you can always tell because they have the Jumeau marking and they have the small eye cuts. They were, again, only made for a few years. They were also early dolls. They came in sizes 1 through 14. I don't know if there's ever been a size 0. They had applied ears like this one on the big dolls. They came in brown eyes and blue eyes. And they had kind of a wistful surprised look on their face. I love this one in particular. So they were only made for a couple of years. So the Triste, the EJ, and these were all made at the same time. And then comes the absolute classic Jumeau doll that everybody wants and everybody should have is the Tete model. Tete just means head. And the head Jumeau is the Jumeau made the head. They always also made the bodies, but you can see they went from incising, which is the pressing into the bisque, to stamping it on. And probably that's a cheaper way to manufacture, is to stamp on. And so this one says Déposé Tete Jumeau sans garantie du gouvernement, which means it's a government patent and it's size 11. So Tete Jumeaus always have this red stamp on the back. Sometimes they were sold to a department store, so the stamping wasn't put on, and you'll see some other dolls that had a different marking on the back, but they're basically, it's Tete Jumeaus for a particular department store. They ran from size, I think they may have even gone to size 0 all the way through size 20, which is a giant doll. That's like 36 inches. That's a huge one, probably again used for exhibition. You can see these ones had a little bit darker painting around the face. They're starting to get a little bit more vibrant than the wistful, delicate painting of the earlier dolls. They were now made out of poured bisque. So you can see here, there's a ridge on the rim of the head, which happens when you pour bisque into a mold or you pour the slip into a mold. The pressed ones don't have that. It's very thin here. It's only like 1/8 of an inch. So that's how you can tell. A poured bisque head has the ridge. And that's how you can tell a repro too, is because a repro of an early doll will always have a ridge. The classic Jumeau shoes were introduced at this time with the bow on the toes and the B stamp on the bottom. There's a couple of different sizes. This is a tiny little size 1. And you can see the classic Jumeau socks, which are these lacy socks with the ribbing on the top. And the chemises either had a red flowered print or a blue flowered print. I think the blue flowered print was on the blonde dolls and the red flowered print was on the brunette dolls, but it wasn't necessarily always the case. This one is a picture you can see here. This is one of those chemises. That's not a dress, that's a chemise. In other words, that's a slip. It's meant to just be a slip, a pretty fancy slip in my opinion. But this is a Jumeau size 6. She's a later one. And the Tete Jumeaus had both open mouth and later they had closed mouth, and then later they had open mouth. This one probably also has sleep eyes. And you can see the fancy boxes, and a lot of advertising is on these boxes. And they almost look like shoe boxes, but the doll is in the box with the cover and the advertising material on the inside. So this is a great find here to have one in the original box with the original outfit. You can see also that with some of these later dolls, they are introduced new gimmicks, the jointed wrists, the open mouth with the teeth. So you'll see a grand variety of different looks for the Tete Jumeaus because the earliest ones were still using like the EJ mold. This one looks like an EJ. That one looks like an EJ. This one looks like a incised Jumeau with the little eye cuts, but that says Tete on the back. She still has light, delicate painting. This one's got a little bit darker painting. This one has a little bit more darker painting. So there's a lot of variety in a Tete Jumeau. You can't always tell just by looking at it to place what it is. There were transitions and they didn't throw the molds away. They used them until they wore out. Another doll that was made in the same time as the Tetes were made was a specific doll for the Louvre department store. And the Louvre was kind of like the Macy's of the time. And it was a big fancy department store and they wanted their own version of a Jumeau doll. So Jumeau made a baby Louvre, which looks like a Jumeau, but it's got a slightly different face. Little square on the face, a little bit wider forehead. This happens to be my doll here. And their bodies, strangely, you can see this one, they're really pink. And you can see this wrist over here is really pink. For some reason, the bodies were painted a different color. But they're kind of like a Tete Jumeau, a little bit in the appearance. They're all, for the most part, they're closed mouth, but there are a few with open mouth. And they started to get into the 1890s Kate Greenaway style outfits with they started to get away from the drop waist outfits and went more to the child's with the high-waisted pinafore look. So that's Baby Louvre, and they're also marked on the back, BL. So if you've got a B10L, that's a Baby Louvre size 10. So that's how you can always know a Baby Louvre. They've got the BL on the back. This is an interesting one, the Paris baby. One of Jumeau's partners left the firm and started his own firm. His name was Anatole Donnel. So he created this doll called the Paris baby. And that's it right here. What does she look like? She looks like a baby Jumeau. She looks like either a Tete or a Incised. So Emile Jumeau sued him and said, you cannot use my mold for your dolls. And so the courts found with him and said, you have to smash the mold. So they smashed the molds. So no more dolls from the copies from the Jumeau factory by Donnel and C. So Jumeau came up with his own model of a Paris baby, which is this one here on the right. And you can find her. It's very rare to find one of these original Paris babies from Donnel and C. They have that on the back of them, and they have the Donnel marking on the body. So we're not without controversy in the doll world. Next, there's a few oddities I just wanted to mention. The phonograph doll is one that has the music box on the inside, and you can play. It winds up on the back, and little girl could put these little discs in. It was a Lioret, Lioret. It was a record player that played these little wax discs, and some of them sing. You can get them to actually work. I restored and fixed one of these so that it actually played. And so there she is, and they had a special dress that flapped down so the little girl could remove the breastplate, change the record, wind her up, and play it. And the dress could just, you know, to keep the whole dress off to do this. And I made this dress here for this reproduction dress for this phonograph Jumeau, and I made it to flap down also. There's a few other oddities here. They did make some multi-face dolls. So this was one of the character dolls, and you can see it's even got some of this the fabric that was used for the chemises, this rosebud fabric, and it makes a laughing face and a smiling face. And then down here is Baby Francais. She's marked on the back BF, and she's another Jumeau creation. There were a few ethnic dolls that were created, and one of them was just looking at the outfit, and the doll was a Caucasian doll, but they dressed her up to be an Asian doll. They made black dolls and brown dolls, mulatto dolls, and they also did this one with the Asian eye cuts. Very unusual and hard to find. The next one is the page that shows the characters from the Jumeau firm. And some of these are really rare and hard to find. And some of them are dolls that were made during the SFBJ timeframe. Some of the later ones are here. You can see the quality isn't as nice as the earlier ones. Some of these ones from different regions in France. They're the Princess Elizabeth dolls. This is one of the early bluettes that was made by Jumeau, used in their molds for some of the early bluettes. They had cheaper bodies. They were, again, mass produced. They kind of a lot of them look surprised. This is a 1907 model, which apparently was made in 1907. And a lot of these were really large in their open mouth, but this one's a very lovely one. This one's probably made in the 1930s or 40s. So it's made to be one of the ladies of history. These came in a variety of different colors and different costumes. So a few interesting features I wanted to just point out, kind of summarizing what I've told you on the previous slides, is this is the classic Jumeau chemise. That's how you can tell. The early costumes were really lovely. The shoe markings, you can see this one is a pair of size 8 shoes. They had the little honeybee on the bottom, and it says Paris Déposé with the size number. The other thing is, even though a lot of French shoes had the bow on the toe and the pointy toe, the bottom with the B is classic Tete Jumeau. Some of the earlier Jumeau shoes weren't pointy like this, but they still had EJ Jumeau Bébé on the bottom. They were always marked, and Jumeau did a lot of selling and advertising with the items that he furnished with the dolls. They had cork pates. You can see this is an example. I was talking about the pressed bisque. See that ridge? There's no ridge on the edge. That means that somebody pushed this in with their fingers. This white stuff is plaster that's used to hold the eyes in, and the eyes are these pinched corner shapes, and they're solid eyes that had a big bulgy front. These are paperweight eyes. This one is very extreme. The other thing is on the fixed wrist bodies, you can see that even though the wrists are fixed, the hands stick out sideways. Like, hello, I'm here. So that's a classic Jumeau body when the hands are sitting out the sides. And this is a classic Jumeau head attachment spring. The spring goes up attached and goes with a little, I think what you call that thing, little cotter pin type action. So you push down on the spring, pull that little holder out, and the head would be able to come off. And the bodies had the blue stamp on the back. So here's some classic body features. This is the stamp that you see on the dolls that were made after 1878. Again, here we have poured bisque, pressed bisque. Later doll, earlier doll. But they both still have the classic Jumeau attachment mechanism. I don't know of anybody else who used that attachment mechanism. Then this is the 8 ball jointed doll. These are early ones. These balls are floating. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is an early EJ doll, probably like a size 12 and a pristine body. So she would have this stamp on the back, and it's all these pieces. So it's several pieces to put together. The next iteration, so this is a little Incised Jumeau from a little bit later. And you can see the balls have now been attached to the elbow joints and to the shoulder joints. So it's fewer pieces. The knee joints have the ball on them, and the hip joints have the ball on them. And they are the slots so the doll can sit down. Then we've got our doll with the jointed wrists. So that's the next iteration. They didn't have jointed feet. They had jointed wrists. And this is an example of the Baby Louvre. So you can see her pink body. And Baby Louvres, as I said, strangely enough, almost always have these pink bodies. And the markings, and this is a little bit hard to see, but it says Déposé Jumeau with the artist check marks on the size. So this is size 6. So the word Jumeau is spelled out. That suggests it's an Incised Jumeau. The EJ is the E10J with the Déposé above. So that's the later version of the EJ doll. And then the stamped head, which is Tete Jumeau, sans garantie de gouvernement, Déposé, PTE, and then this size 3 with the artist check marks that painted the head. So that's how you can tell the three of the different generations of Jumeau heads. Early versus later, I tried to point out a few of these things when I was going along, but the poured heads are later than the pressed heads. The sharp modeling versus the soft modeling. Uniqueness and consistency of look is later, because it probably were templates that we use. This one's much later doll than this one. You can see the fixed eyes versus sleep eyes. Sleep eyes are later. The even eye cuts versus the uneven eye cuts. Fixed versus jointed wrists. Closed mouth, open mouth. And light versus high color facial painting. This is an early one. This is a later one. You can see they call these owl eyes because they're very dark. Look at this one. Pale, little eyebrows, big heavy eyebrows. Shaded lips, very pale, solid color red lips. That was popular as we got into the 1890s. Okay, and the brush strokes, very fine brush strokes, and this coarser brush strokes. So these were more vibrant and more extreme. That's how you can usually tell the early versus later. So a few closing comments down here. Selecting and valuing. Because I've been collecting Jumeaus for more than 40 years, people ask me, like, which one should I get? These two dolls are absolutely pristine. They were part of the Huguette Clark collection, the reclusive lady who was a millionaire and had this fabulous collection of dolls. These are two in their original costume, probably never played with. Original hats, original shoes, just absolutely pristine condition. These are what the Jumeau costumes looked like. They used a lot of pleats. They had a lot of this bushy sleeve, and then it tapers down. A lot of pleats in the front, and this color, this light blue color, was used a lot by them, and the pointy toe shoes and the knit socks. If you could find a doll like that, even with a hairline crack in the head, I would buy it in a heartbeat, because it's so pristine and original. So a few factors would be the rarity of the model. The Tete Jumeau, for example, is a very rare model. Some of those character faces I was showing you, like that Asian one, very rare to find. So the rarity of the model itself, or the version of the model, or the size. Sometimes the tiny size or the great big size. They made fewer of those, just like they do with shoes. You know, there's only a few size 4 shoes, but there's lots of 7s and 8s. So if you think about that, size, different condition, and originality. Again, these dolls in their original dresses would command top price. If the doll is in its original box, means it might have just come from the owner's house. Those are factors, and it's very rare to find a doll in the original box. The condition. If the head has an eye fleck, which means a little tiny crack somewhere or chip on the eye, or a firing line, which means when the doll was made, there must have been a flaw in the porcelain, and there's usually a little red line somewhere in the top of the head. That's usually not considered damage because it was during the making. A small hairline might not create a problem, especially if it's in the back. A big hairline right through the face might cause a problem. Chip somewhere, a chip on the bottom neck socket, or a chip on the rim are really no big deals. But if we start getting into repairs, a doll fell and broke its face. I mean, there are people like myself who do bisque repairs. I'd rather save the doll and sell it as a repaired doll than throw it away. But so you can get a doll that's repaired. My rule of thumb is that if a doll has a head repair, it's probably at least a third off the price of a perfect one, or it could be as bad as half off, depending on the model. But a hairline, maybe a 25 to 30% off the price. Wig pulls are when the glue in the wig pulled some of the glaze off the porcelain, and sometimes makes a little chip on the ridge. The body, is the body the correct body or not? Is there chipping? Like you can see this chipping on this body. The paint starts to give away. Or are there replaced pieces? It's better to know. I'd rather have a body that's kind of ratty but original than one that's been all repainted. Sometimes there's no choice because the body's so bad. In order to save it, you might have to repaint it. But as long as like you know that it's been worked on, then you can buy and price it accordingly. Condition with, does it have couturier or labeled clothing? Something like this, an unnamed bleu, which is another big department store in Paris. Is there a label in the outfit? That would make it more expensive. And emotional, some people are very, very emotional over an attic find. This one was an attic find I got at an auction, a local auction. The pieces were all there, came out of a house. It's a Jumeau Triste that I got for relatively inexpensively. And that is the doll that was wearing the red plaid outfit in my cabinet. And if you know the provenance, means do you know the history of the ownership? Was it owned by someone famous, or owned by someone and the family has notes and things about it? Those are emotional things that can create the desire for a doll. These ones, as I said, they're original, so they're high value because of that. And high value because of the rarity in the original costume, and this provenance with them knowing that they belong to that very famous lady Huguette Clark. So these ones would be like top of the line, top price of any price range. So those are just some factors. I would rather have a rare doll with a hairline than a common doll that didn't. That's just me, because I collect for my own purposes, and I also collect for possible resale. So rarer is always better. This is a photo that shows a whole bunch. These are my dolls. And see if you can find the imposter, meaning, can you either find a repro or a German doll that was made to look just like the French ones? Well, this is an Incised Jumeau. She's not the fake. This is a Paris baby. She's not the fake. This is a Tete Jumeau. She's not the fake. This is another Tete Jumeau. She's not a fake. This is a Tete Jumeau. She's not a fake. This is a Tete Jumeau. She's not a fake. This is an Incised Jumeau. She's not a fake. This is fake. This is a German Kulenz, I believe, or Sonnenberg, a German doll that was made to look like the Tete. So you can pick these up relatively cheaply. They are beautiful, very well made, because they were made by the Germans to compete with the French market. So she's got beautiful like spiral eyes and looks like a French baby Tete. So you can find these. They are marked with the size. They're not always marked with anything else. So you have to maybe go to somebody who knows dolls to be able to distinguish for you whether it's a German or French doll. And these are a few Jumeaus in my cabinet. These are some EJs. These are, all of them are EJs except for this one, which is the portrait that I showed you. And this little one is a Tete Jumeau. So those are a few of the middle-sized ones in my cabinet. This is this was the doll I showed you in the pieces. I made her outfit, and I made that outfit. And these are my Tete Jumeaus, and this is a large EJ.
Oh.
And then these are the little ones. I showed an earlier picture of the size 3 EJs as them, and there's a couple of size 4s, and this one is early premiere portrait. So these little ones are great because they fit in small cabinet. You can tell I like Jumeaus. And these are some these are all 3 EJAs. They have slightly different look. This is the baby Louvre here. This is a portrait. And this is this was the phonograph baby in the box. These are the sources that I used. You can see here that I went a lot of on the internet, and I did get some information from some books. Books are a great source of learning about these dolls. So here's another picture of my Tete again. I've subsequently added another one to collection. And this is another little Tete Jumeau. She doesn't look like a Tete Jumeau, but she is. And over here, I have a few online sources. You can find a lot of information on the internet. And you can even look on some of the auction sites and just see the descriptions people have of dolls, and you can get an idea of the pricing, what people charge for them, and how much damage will devalue the cost, because you can get them pretty cheap. And this is some contact information on me. As I said, I belong to both the Boston Doll Study Group, and I belong to the Granite State in New Hampshire. And I belong to the Doll Doctors Association. I can fix dolls, I can fix bisque, I make wigs, and I do all that kind of stuff because it's fun. And this is my handle on eBay. I'm under West 2 York 1 for 2 Westie dogs and 1 Yorkshire Terrier. And then my Ruby Lane is Viking Girl Dolls and Bears. And there's my email, lucymy320@gmail.com.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the program. We'd like to extend a special thank you to Lisa Nemi for providing the program for us today. If you're not a member of UFDC, be sure you go to ufdc.org, check out the website, and while you're there, sign up to be a new member. And when you do, be sure you tell them Karen sent you. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.